Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Tuesday at 5. RPM is about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Every week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in NYC. Join the movement at socialists.nyc.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI, a socialist radio show and podcast from members of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. I'm Leah Zishi, and I use she, her pronouns. And today we're going to be talking about the incredible grassroots victory of Tiffany Cabán for district attorney in Queens. We'll be talking about how we got there, the doors knocked, that whole campaign, the latest about what's happening. But first, we have the headlines with Jack Devine.
Yo, what's good, New York? This is Jack Devine with Revolutions Per Minute's headlines, brought to you by The Thorn. Tiffany Cabán declared victory after the polls closed last Tuesday, thanking the Democratic Socialists of America and the Working Families Party for being the, quote, engine behind her campaign. Politico tied Cabán's likely win to the AOC effect and highlighted the blow to the Queen's machine. With thousands of absentee and affidavit ballots yet to be counted until the end of the week, Cabán's 1,199 vote lead, 1.79%, expanded after a recanvass yesterday. If the margin is below 0.5%, a recount will be called, which the Queen's Democratic Party, still supporting Queensborough President Melinda Katz, is hoping will occur. You'll be hearing about this race and its impact on New York politics and the prison industrial complex throughout the rest of this episode. In other electoral news, Lumari Maldonado Cruz handily defeated the county machine-backed Wyatt Gibbons to win a Queens County judgeship in last week's primaries. Legal aid attorney Grace Park won a contested civil court seat in Manhattan. Despite these potential victories by reformers, it's crucial to remember that violence and racism remain deeply entrenched in the criminal justice system. Following the death of 27-year-old Layleen Polanco in Rikers Island earlier this month, the New York City Board of Corrections is considering a 15-day consecutive day limit on solitary confinement in city jails. The NYC Department of Investigation issued a report finding that the NYPD had investigated almost 2,500 complaints of biased treatment by police officers. Unsurprisingly, the NYPD claimed that none of these claims were substantiated and did nothing to address them. In housing news, grassroots organizers are considering pushing New York's public pensions to establish guidelines that prohibit investing in equity firms that profit from real estate speculation. In labor news, workers are organizing and collectively fighting back against capital across the United States. Here in New York, workers from Property Services Union 32BJ SEIU at a JFK Airport American Airlines contractor have gone on strike, citing abuse of the paid sick leave law and mistreatment of immigrant workers. Strikes have also occurred at airports in Miami and Washington, D.C. In Boston, some 3,000 people gathered on Copley Square Wednesday afternoon in solidarity with hundreds of workers from the nearby Wayfair headquarters who walked off the job in protest of their employer's contract to furnish a detention center for migrant youth in Texas. Speakers and attendees of the demonstration included members of the Democratic Socialists of America, the Industrial Workers of the World, Boston's Teachers Union, and Jewish Voices for Peace. On Sunday, dozens of Jewish allies took action at the Elizabeth Detention Center in New Jersey. Quote, "As Jews, we cannot sit and watch as ICE terrorizes immigrant families, separating children from their parents and detaining them in deplorable conditions. As Jews, we know that never again is now." Also this past Sunday, here in New York, was the Queer Liberation March. The NYC DSA Queer Caucus were a main organizer of the Reclaim Pride Coalition, which drew at least 45,000 people into the streets to demand an end to rainbow capitalism. For more news updates, check out WBAI Evening News, hosted by yours truly tonight at 6 p.m. And now, back to Lee Zishi for our coverage on the Tiffany Cabán campaign.
Our daily headlines are brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by New York City DSA Electoral Working Group, covering local politics and radical activism. Subscribe at thethorn.nyc. And you're listening to Revolutions Per Minute. I'm Leah Zishi. I use she, her pronouns. And today we're talking about the incredible, still be to officially declared, but victory by Tiffany Cabán for District Attorney in Queens. We are joined by Tasha Van Auken and Bianca Cunningham. Tasha is the co-coordinator of the New York City DSA Brooklyn Electoral Working Group. She was campaign manager for Julia Salazar for State Senate and the GOTV director for Tiffany Cabán. We're also joined by Bianca Cunningham, who is the co-chair of New York City DSA. Before we really start digging into the campaign and what's happened and where we're at, I just would like our guests to get to know a little bit more about you. Tasha, how did you get involved in DSA?
I got involved early 2017 when everybody got involved. I had co-founded a grassroots group called Team Bernie NY and done a lot of work when Bernie ran. And all of that was grassroots. I wasn't on staff or anything. And I was incredibly impressed by the work that volunteers did to collect supporters for the campaign so that when the campaign got here, they had a lot to sort of build off of. And in 2017, I knew that I wanted to shift over someplace where there was a similar focus on real volunteer-led organizing that builds collective power. And I had a hunch that it would be DSA based on my interactions with some folks that were already involved with DSA. And, it just took one electoral meeting that was really well run and really exciting with lots of wonderful people who asked great questions and listened, and that's it. The rest is history.
Yeah, and recently you were the GOTV director. So if you're not like super nerdy like all of us into electoral politics, GOTV means get out the vote. Can you just kind of explain like what that position actually entails?
Yeah. So basically on a typical electoral campaign, you'll spend the bulk of the campaign from day one until just a few days before the election, convincing people to vote for your candidate. Keeping track of all of those people, building a list of supporters, and then usually the Friday or Saturday before Election Day, you switch over and you focus on making sure that all of those supporters that you've spent months identifying know when, where, and how to vote. So GOTV is basically just a massive mobilization where you're knocking on that entire universe of voters multiple times in 4 days.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get a lot more into that later in the show, what that looked like for this recent race. Bianca, so you're the co-chair of New York City DSA. What does that mean, and what do you do in that position?
Sure. So this is my second term as co-chair that I just started, and what it basically means is that I get the honor of being the spokesperson for this awesome organization. It means that I get to represent the organization externally, and it also means that internally, sometimes I could be in rooms and help people come together around common ideas.
And what originally brought you to DSA?
Yeah, so I was actually at the time hiding in the Communication Workers of America district office, fighting a case where I was fired illegally for starting a union, and had become really close with some of the organizers in the department who were socialists and were talking to me almost every day about socialism and what it actually meant. And one day they came in and said, well, we're going to meet with some NYSNA members. You should be at this meeting. And I went. It was right in our union offices, and it was New York State Nurses Association members as well as Communication Workers of America. And Maria Svart, the national director for DSA, was there. And this was around like 2000, right after Bernie lost the primary in New York. They said, we think that the labor movement should be able to respond to social justice issues collectively without being held up by bureaucracy or beholden to bureaucracy. And so we're going to start a DSA labor branch. And so I said, okay. And I became the chair of the labor branch. I served in that for 2 years. And as Tasha said, the rest is history.
So you're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. To connect with us after the show, you can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com, and you can always find us on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today we're talking about the Queens District Attorney race and what seems to be Tiffany Cabán's incredible grassroots victory. Let's start there. Tuesday night, a week from, it was only a week ago. Can you believe that? Tasha, what happened last Tuesday?
Gosh, I mean, I think that it was just the crazy thing about winning a campaign with such a small margin the way that we did is that you can really look at every individual piece and be like, wow, if we didn't have that piece or that person or that part of the operation, this might not have happened. And it really, for me, it just really highlights how this was just a massive mobilized effort of so many people and organizations to make this happen. And I mean, Tuesday night it was very, very strange because this is not a race where anybody went into it and thought this was going to be an easy win. I think a lot of people were like, this probably can't happen. Seeing the numbers come back, especially the way they did, with it being so tight for the entire time, was really intense and surreal experience. And we're still in it, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think this was just a really amazing display of what happens when many groups come together and thousands of people come out to help be part of this process.
And what was the final vote count by the end of the night?
Luckily, I wrote that down because I don't remember numbers. But Caban basically has an 1,100 vote lead. So she has 33,814 votes. Katz had 32,724 votes. And currently, there's still absentee ballots and affidavits being counted as well.
And what was Melinda Katz? She's right now the one who was in second place. She was the one who was, kind of endorsed by the Queen's Democratic machine. What was her response on election night?
I don't really know, honestly. I'm so tunnel visioned on just everything that we still have to get done on this campaign that I don't know that I saw a whole lot about what her response was.
Besides, we need to recount.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
How are you feeling on Tuesday night, Bianca, as you were watching this all come in?
Oh, I was nervous just like everyone else. And I also, I was so moved to see that Queens residents made a collective decision that they wanted to redefine what justice meant. And it really seemed like a pivotal moment, and it is all because of all of the hard work of all of the volunteers on the campaign and all the coalitions that we were a part of, and it just felt really powerful, but also nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah, I saw a lot of, videos. You have the whole crowd chanting Black Lives Matter and Si se puede. Like, that's not your typical victory party, or
especially for a district attorney. And I would say, as somebody that was on the stage was being crowded by a whole host of elected officials, some of who weren't even behind Caban from the very beginning, but saw an opportunity and wanted to be, seen. I would say that they were really uncomfortable with those chants of Black Lives Matter and, Si se puede and DSA even. It's really, I think it's becoming clear to them that things are changing in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, these are people, this was a county that's been just like really controlled for a very long time by, they call it the Queen's machine. And we've been slowly chipping away at that. And we'll definitely, I think, dig in that to that a little bit more. But we're going to go to a clip and actually hear from Tiffany Cabán at a rally before Tuesday's election.
We are running on a bold, not just progressive, decarceral platform. And we are challenging entrenched political interests. And we knew it would be a hard fight. but we have the community on our side. We have community members who not only want, but are ready to demand real reform here in Queens. Ready to demand a district attorney's office that works for them. Community members who believe that we don't have to sacrifice public safety for equity. Community members who aren't going to buy into the old school fear-mongering of our black and brown communities that only serve the status quo. And over the past 6 months, we have built the most beautiful, the most powerful, the most diverse coalition of hardworking folks that a borough-wide race has ever seen. But you have formerly incarcerated folks, sex workers, undocumented immigrants, our local and national elected officials coming on board and fighting this fight with us. You know we're doing something special.
So that was Tiffany Cabán. She is currently in the lead for Queens District Attorney. So what's happening now? Is it a recount? What's the actual language that's being used?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, a lot of people on Tuesday were like, oh, what exactly does this mean? And had to have it explained for sure. It's not a recount. There was a recanvass of all of the election machines, and that part is over. What's currently happening is counting affidavits and absentee ballots. So absentee ballots had to be postmarked by Election Day, so they were sort of coming in for a few days. And affidavits are just any time that somebody goes to a polling location and their name isn't on the book, and they fill out an affidavit to vote that way. So it's two separate things. There are a lot of both, thousands of each of them. And so there's currently, I would say, hundreds of volunteers helping the legal team go through all of these and make sure that we have our own sort of independent count of everything. So I think everybody feels pretty confident that if there's a fair count, that everything will be good. But we definitely, there's still a lot of work to do right now, basically. Yeah.
And so if it kind of, all plays out, as we expect, and Tiffany Cabán, that means she will have won the primary, and the way New York politics goes, that pretty much means you won the general election as well. Bianca, can you talk a little bit, first of all, just, for maybe people who don't understand how a district attorney, might affect their lives? Like, what does it mean? Like, what does a district attorney do? And what this victory could mean for the criminal justice movement?
Sure. So until actually we came into this race, I actually didn't even understand how powerful the district attorney's office was. So many times that we target the police and elected officials, not understanding that really the district attorney gets to set the tone for what exactly is going to be prosecuted, how bail is going to be set, or whether they're going to require bail. Just the whole culture of the criminal justice system is really set by the district attorney. And so what this means is that we won't have people sitting in Rikers anymore that are not convicted of any crime but just can't afford to get out. It means that hopefully sex workers won't be prosecuted for just doing things that they need to do to provide for themselves and their families. It hopefully means that attorneys or prosecutors won't be able to bully residents into taking plea deals whenever they come in, instead of actually going to having the system go to a fair trial. It means that there's just going to be another thread of fairness and equity injected into the system. And I think it's really an opportunity for us to reimagine what justice actually should look like.
And how does this fit into the kind of a larger national movement? We've seen some other, folks run for DSA. Not for DSA, for DA. So how does this victory fit into that?
Yeah, so I think Tiffany was endorsed by the Real Justice PAC, which is fairly new, maybe only a year old, I think, which was their movement was to find progressive district attorneys across the country and run them as a thread or a way to try to counteract this unjust system that we're all dealing with. And so I think that what it means is that we get to now follow in the footsteps of places like Philly with Larry Krasner, who have had progressive DAs, and we get to actually start to really live up to a the term that people call us a progressive city. Queens is actually so regressive and like 50 years behind in the way that in what they convict. They convict like turnstile jumpers. They still send them, to Rikers. They still convict like small possession marijuana. I mean, they're just so far behind where we are as a people in this time. And so what that means is that we get to now live up to that, hopefully, at least in Queens, and set the example for the other boroughs that this actually can work.
And Tasha, what kind of made you decide to get involved in this campaign and work for it? And how do you think this victory will, impact people's lives?
Yeah. I worked on this for just about the last 3.5 weeks, so I jumped in rather late, but I was tangentially involved through DSA and the Queens Electoral Working Group earlier. But I mean, I'm very driven by the movement behind people. The first job I ever had was on the 2008 Obama campaign, and even then it was really the sort of movement that had grown out of that I found really compelling and that pulled me in. And I think it's still the same. I think this is a race, as Bianca sort of already talked about, that can change thousands of people's lives dramatically. So there's just no question that this is an historic race. And for me personally, I'm very focused on field. I feel field work on campaigns. I feel like campaigns like this that have messaging that really appeals to people really care about this stuff. And there just aren't a lot of candidates that run on these things. And I think what we're seeing is when candidates are brave and put all of these issues out there, people are really moved and motivated by it. And what I love to do is be a part of campaigns and help to be a part of shaping them in a way that pulls people in and then keeps them involved in the political process. So it was just like an totally ideal campaign to do that on, because people were extremely excited about it. Especially, you kind of get all of like the dessert with GOTV, because that's when like the momentum is at its peak and people are going, they're really, really amped up to get involved. So it was a no-brainer.
Dessert's a very nice way to put it, where you probably weren't like sleeping for 4 days straight and going through data sheets and like stressed out about stuff. But it's a nice way to put it. Yeah, no, I worked on the Obama campaign in 2012 in rural Western PA, and so our GOTV was very fun.
Yeah.
Bianca, can you just talk a little bit too about like why DSA chose to get involved in this fight?
Sure. So I'll just be honest and say that it was, I think, a little bit of a controversial decision at first. Obviously, as socialists, we don't believe in prison, and we also don't really deal with the police either. And so this was a hard thing. So we actually did like a series of one-on-ones with people to bring people together to have like a town hall type of discussion about what it doesn't mean for a socialist organization to endorse a district attorney candidate. And then surprisingly, even people who you expected to be against it understood immediately the way that we could affect people's, like the material conditions of people's lives every day. And we recognize that it's harm reduction, but we recognize that it's like way past time for something like this to happen. And so we got involved because not only was Tiffany talking about not prosecuting sex workers and decarcerating, reducing the prison population by 75% in her first year, et cetera. But she was also talking about going after people who are our class enemies, like landlords and employees that steal from their workers, like through wage theft. She's actually going to establish a whole unit that looks into employers that practice wage theft with their employers, talking about getting ICE out of courts and also not giving the police access to people in jail or in court. And then also another thing that really, I think, spoke to a lot of us was her dedication to just the idea of idea of like revitalization, or like what's the word, not therapy, but help me. Somebody help me. Restorative justice. Her idea of restorative justice. Thank you. And so that to us aligned with what we have, or what our vision for justice would look like, which is like a rehabilitative process, not a punitive process.
And was DSA one of the first groups to endorse her?
We were the first group to endorse her.
And so, I heard in a lot of her interviews, Tiffany talk about how, something very similar to what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, that, women like her aren't supposed to run or not, in the typical system, and that people a lot like her don't look, that a lot of our politicians don't look like her. She's a queer Latina woman representing Queens, which is one of the most diverse boroughs, Yeah, and, it's also got some conservative bits of it, too. So I want to go to a clip of some from Make the Road, New York, and some of the Latinx supporters of Tiffany Cabán.
Votemos por Caban, porque como joven indocumentado, ella va a luchar por las comunidades inmigrantes.
Votemos por Caban, porque ella va a proteger a nuestros jóvenes.
Ya que ella está apoyando a la comunidad trans.
Porque va a luchar en contra de la criminalización de nuestra comunidad.
Porque ella va a sacar a ICE de las cortes.
Vamos a tumbar la puerta del sistema por Tiffany Cabán. ¡Se puede! ¡Sí se puede! ¡Se puede con Cabán! ¡Sí se puede con Cabán!
Para asegurar que todos tengan acceso a la justicia.
Soy defensora pública. Soy latina nacida en Queens. Yo lucho por mi comunidad.
And those were some supporters of Tiffany Cabán from Make the Road. And you're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM. And we're also on all your favorite podcast apps. You can go to revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com to listen to this episode at any time. And you can find us on Twitter at NYC RPM. And today we're talking about Tiffany Cabán and the amazing grassroots effort to what's looking like a victory. And Tasha, you kind of mentioned before that all the votes are being counted right now. Is there like a date when we're expected to know the results?
I think that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a very specific answer. I think as absentee ballots and affidavits are counted, they'll know more. The legal team will know more. But basically, I think what they're really focused on is getting as strong a handle on what the absentee ballots and the affidavits look like independently. And that's like the real focus right now, because as I said, there's thousands of them, so they have to all be sort of manually gone through, and there's currently right now hundreds of people staring at their computer getting a handle on this stuff. But I think the basic idea is that we just want to be as prepared as humanly possible, because of the machine controlled BOE. We want to make sure that this is a fair process.
Yeah, and how might this, the Queen's machine kind of impact this, or what are some of the concerns?
I mean, I think just we want to make sure there's people in the room when just as when the voting machines were being counted. You just want to make sure there's a person from the campaign that is there and observing everything. So it's just I don't know that I'm able to throw out like the specific fears as much as like we just want to make sure we have all the information independently and that we are a part of the process.
And are there still roles that people can play to volunteer? What still needs to be done?
Yes, there is. Actually, the biggest need right now is for tonight, and there's some need tomorrow, but there's a real urgent need tonight. And it's mostly administrative work, and folks can sign up it's a bit.ly, so it's bit.ly/Caban admin. bit.ly/CABAN admin, ADMIN. And you can sign up there, but basically it's a lot of admin work, again, like going through all these affidavits and absentee ballots. It's not rocket science, but it is very sort of like laborious, detailed work, and we need a lot of eyes on it and as much help as possible.
And so let's go a little bit more into kind of leading up to this, the GOTV and what's going on. Can you just tell us what those 4 days, how many doors were knocked, how many people volunteered, what was this like?
It was incredible. I mean, I've participated in some pretty amazing GOTVs and field campaigns. We blew past every goal we had. This really astonished me. I was really stunned on election day when we were looking at the numbers of volunteers. We, and by we I mean mostly volunteers, knocked on over 120,000 doors in 4 days. And that represents about 1,400 volunteers just over those 4 days, and 3,500 volunteer shifts. And on election day alone, in one day, we had 1,600 volunteer shifts. So we just had, that's a massive, massive number. I have this like, it's sort of a fear, but also it's a good thing. When you're working with a lot of sort of new people who are new to politics, I want to be like, this isn't normal. Like, don't take this for granted. But it's also a really good thing because it's sort of this fresh, amazing fresh slate where the process of electing somebody and what it means to participate in a campaign is just kind of completely reimagined by people who are genuinely excited and part of this massive collective project.
And what are like the conversations like on the doors for that? Do you have to explain to a lot of people what a DA is? Did people kind of instantly get how this affected their lives?
It's a great question. It definitely varies. So ideally, a lot of those conversations happened already. And I think it's really important when looking at GOTV to acknowledge just the amount of work that happened before it, because the get out the vote effort is only going to be as good as the field effort was in the months leading up to it. So ideally, that's what was happening from the moment that field work began on this campaign, which started around when DSA endorsed. Those are the conversations, but yeah, absolutely. I know that most volunteers talked about how to explain what a DA is at a door when you have a limited amount of time, and people really don't know what the DA does and how much power they have.
I heard so many stories from people on election day talking about being on doors and people saying, I don't know if I'm going to vote, but then going through what Tiffany was actually running on and people saying, well, hold on, this seems important. This seems different from what I'm used to. Let me put on my coat. I think I can make it down to the polls to vote. I actually had my own experience with that in Jamaica, talking to people, and they're like, they're all the same. And I was like, no, they want to reduce the prison population by 75%, just going through the points. And she said, oh, wow. Okay, so can you help me find my polling place? And so I think that this is proof that when you run candidates who are, as Tasha said, bold enough to come forward and be honest about what the real issues are, then people will actually be excited about voting.
Yeah, and when you have a margin of about 1,100 votes, it has to, I'm sure, feel like every single person you talk to matters.
Sure.
Yep, definitely.
Well, we're going to go to a quick clip. This is from New York One talking about the Queen's machine.
Of a progressive wave in Western Queens that's credited with moving local lawmakers to the left and scaring off Amazon. And while Tuesday's primary may not be a death blow for the Queens Democratic Organization, the establishment will undoubtedly have to course correct.
If you are an elected official in Queens right now, you have to be looking over your shoulder.
Bobby Kuza, New York One.
So that was a clip from New York One about the Queen's machine. Can you maybe just even kind of talk about what that is, the Queen's machine?
It's this imaginary thing in our head. No, it's the Queen's machine. It's like these Democratic clubs make up this kind of like block of power, and they've been, playing their game, like setting the rules for the game. And kind of just like putting their buddies into different situations, and they've got like the next 20 years laid out. It's not democratic. It's motivated by power and greed and all of the ego and all of the things that we're trying to get out of politics, and it represents something ancient and something of the past, but they have enormous amounts of resources, money, power, platforms, access, and so they're really hard to go up against. It's their true Goliath.
Yeah, and so in the district attorney's race in Queens, they backed Melinda Katz. And so the kind of first big blow to the Queen's machine was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she ran against Joseph Crowley for Congress, who was, the head of really this Queen's machine. And now we have this another, incredible victory. is this the end of the Queens machine? How much more work do we have to do to make Queens a democratic place?
I think no matter what, there's still a lot more work to do. I think one of the things that I definitely was feeling this, that I think we all need to be very careful about, is being very humble about this, and acknowledging that this was very close. And there are still a lot more fights to have. This is an extremely hopeful, like tremendously hopeful moment, because I think what we're seeing is that this model of organizing and really making the political process of electing people something that people can access more easily and be pulled into and become part of a bigger, like really powerful community. It's an effective model and it works. But there's so much farther that we have to go and we need to go.
Yeah, and I mean, what does this victory mean for DSA electorally and kind of the left in general?
I think there's the big picture stuff that I feel like Bianca will probably speak well to, and there's the sort of like behind the scenes sort of organizational things where one of the things that doesn't get as much attention in a race like this or a campaign like this is not just all the doors that were knocked and all the volunteers we have, but the amazing leadership that was developed and built through this campaign. And one of the things that I personally am just like was blown away by was I stepped into this campaign 3.5 weeks before the election and walked into just this like amazing group of leaders that had in large part been developed through this campaign. And for GOTV, we had 5 staging locations. So it's basically 5 extremely busy campaign offices throughout Queens, run entirely by volunteers, entirely by about 35 volunteers who had been leading canvases and leading events throughout the entire campaign. And, I always feel like it's a successful GOTV if on election day I can like sneak out and go canvass. And like I was able to do that because it was just the most amazing, strong team. So I think what we got out of it is just this amazing leadership infrastructure in Queens. And like I just saw like future campaign managers and field directors, and like that's how we're gonna staff like future campaigns that we work on.
Yeah, and do you see that kind of building from like previous campaigns? You worked on the Julia Salazar State Senate campaign, or people who volunteered with that campaign now, help leading things for Tiffany Cabán. Are we seeing that kind of?
Yeah, 100%. When you talk, I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing, Bianca. When you talk to people on these campaigns, and you're like, when did you first get involved? Oh, I was canvassing for Julia last year, or I first knocked on doors for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's definitely, when you have that experience, it's extremely invigorating, and it helps you connect with like a whole new group of people. And for me, it's like a reason to get out of bed in the morning because you feel hopeful, and it's such a counter to everything else that we get, that I think that's the goal, is people keep working on these campaigns and get better, and we all build institutional knowledge together and get better and better at winning these campaigns.
Yeah, and Bianca, can you talk a little bit too about kind of big picture what this means for DSA? I mean, in addition to like Black Lives Matter, you had the room chanting DSA last Tuesday. What does this win mean for DSA? And kind of, even talk a little bit about the progress that you've seen since joining and where we're at now.
Yeah, so I think that what this win means is that DSA's approach to politics and the way that we've done it has been so different from the way that it's been done previously. We're not leading with viable candidates or charismatic personalities or talking of these one people. We're really one person. We're actually leading with issues. And so to your point, Tasha, that's why you see so much overlap of people saying, I got involved in this campaign, because the issues don't change. The person does, And so when you're leading with issues, it actually gives you an infrastructure to be able to organize together collectively, even within our coalitions. I mean, listen, we beat Amazon with the same coalition that we won with Julia Salazar and even last week with Tiffany Cabán. So it really provides, I think, an infrastructure and an avenue for people to get involved beyond just the campaign and really draws them closer to like our message of socialism. And so this year is all about, for me, and I think for all of us, about building our capacity, about not letting people say that it was a one-off thing, about proving that people really care about these issues and that creating a sense of urgency in our own city about the changes that we want to see.
Do you think the establishment is getting scared of DSA?
I know for a fact that they're very afraid of DSA. And so I think that's why it's so important. I mean, one of the things that I thought about after the election or even election night, Tasha talked about us being really humble, and that's true. And I also thought about the ways that we can support folks that we are getting elected past past the election or past the campaign, because, folks are really stepping out with some really bold ideas. And I think Julia Salazar, would speak herself about her own experience of feeling very isolated sometimes in Albany. And it's really incumbent upon us to really drive and make sure the movement is pushing and supporting the things that they're trying to change in their respective roles.
Yeah, and I mean, are there lessons that were learned during this campaign that we can be using? Like, what do you think is next for DSA electoral?
I think that we have the power to ask. Tasha can say way more about electoral than I do, but I think the power to ask. I think when we first found Tiffany, she was not supportive of the No New Jails coalition. She was in favor of these smaller kind of like neighborhood jails going up. That wasn't a reason to discount her. That wasn't a reason to not endorse her. It was a conversation, and it was an opportunity for us to come together and talk about these issues in a way that she was able to be moved. And I feel like that speaks to the ability of us to move electeds and not just give up on them, but to really develop people and not leave them because they're not where we are. Like, we need to bring people along on this journey.
Yeah, and what I was asking is, are there lessons that were learned, and what do you think is kind of next for DSA electoral building off of this? I know the votes are still being counted, so you're not, chilling just yet.
There's a lot. I mean, we have state races, and I think, work on identifying candidates for those has already begun. City council races, and coming, they're just going to come right up at us. And then obviously DSA endorsed Bernie Sanders, so there is a ton of work happening right now to register voters. I think one of the most disheartening things to me about our voting system in New York is how many voters are disenfranchised. And so we're doing a lot of work to make sure people understand our voting laws and to make sure that they can vote for the elections they want to vote in. But there is no shortage, I promise, no shortage of work coming up for the electoral groups.
Yeah, and actually next week we are going to have Jabari Brisport on to talk a little bit about, running in a local election. He ran as a socialist for city council, because 3 years ago now? 2 years ago?
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
So, if you're interested in that, make sure you definitely tune in next week. We've got about 15 minutes left of the show, so now we want to open it up to our listeners. You can call in at 212-209-2877. Let us know how the criminal justice system has affected your life. Are you excited about this new opportunity with the Queens DA? Let us know what you're thinking. Maybe you knocked on some doors and have some good stories. Our number is 212-209-2877. And so while we're, maybe waiting for a caller, do you have any other, moments from the campaign that you would like to talk about, or things that happened, or stories people told you about knocking doors?
I mean, I too, it's so funny that we all had the same experience. I also, on election day, knocked on a door and the person wasn't going to vote, and I convinced, it's not that often that you have that dramatic of an experience when knocking on doors, but it seems like everybody did for this race, which speaks a lot to how much people care about this.
And we have a caller on the line. Caller, you are now live on WBAI.
Hi, great discussion, and I understood the message about needing administrative help tonight, and I'm wondered if you still need people tomorrow. What are the hours, and what is the location?
I can answer that. So I think there is quite a bit going on, and the folks who are running this operation, who are not me, will know how to answer that. So I definitely recommend you sign up at the bit.ly link, and they will get back to you and let you know what the opportunities are, because there are several kind, and they can definitely be more specific about it.
Could you just give that address again, please,
Sure.
and also before the program's over?
I'll give it right now, and I'm sure it'll be given again. It's bit.ly/Caban admin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Keep
you.
up the great work.
Thanks so much for calling in. Any other stories from the campaign, or how are you feeling on Tuesday night?
Tuesday night was super exciting, supercharged. We were all super charged up. I actually got the honor to be on the stage representing DSA, and it was really funny because I felt a little shy about being up there with all the suits. I'm just nobody. And it was funny because it was Jessica Ramos, I think, and some of the Caban staff were like, "No, you deserve to be up here. Bring, and acknowledge DSA and as one of the main engines of the campaign." And so it just felt really great. It felt like our party in a lot of ways, which is amazing. And it was amazing to see all the coalition partners in the room.
And we've got another caller on the line. Caller, you are live now on WBAI. Hi, can you hear us? We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a question. I live in the Jackson Heights neighborhood, and I saw the young lady, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and just my initial instincts just told me that she was a sincere person. And also, there was another young lady who was running in our neighborhood. Her name was, I think, Ari Espinal, and I think she lost to another young lady. What is your perspective on her? Is she? I just felt a sense of sincerity about her, and she lost the race. And I was out of the country doing most of her campaign, so I said to myself, I'm going to come back and help her campaign and knock on some doors. Now, what is your perspective? I just met her one time, but I just got real good feelings for her.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are familiar with the second woman you were talking
Ari
about.
Espinal? Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Yeah, how much of this do you think, I think obviously Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, somebody everybody knows about, how much has everything, just really shifted in Queens and electorally?
I think Ocasio-Cortez winning last year, it's so crazy that it was a year ago, basically. A lot's happened in a year. I think her winning that race really shifted what people think is possible, which is a really powerful motivator for people. And I think that one of the things that doesn't get talked about all that often, but I think is one of the reasons I'm at DSA is, DSA doesn't just endorse candidates that are better candidates. It's not just about that. It's also everything that DSA does, going for the root of the problem, and the root of the structure in this case is how electoral campaigns are run and what are the divisions that have sort of historically been embedded in the process to elect candidates that really exclude people from the political process or repel people from it even. And I think what we're seeing is that when you have organizations that are willing to go into these campaigns the way that we have in DSA and say actually volunteers, we're not just going to say oh yeah, we're a grassroots organization and it's a soundbite. We're an actual democratic organization that builds buy-in around these candidates, and that's a reason why we're able to get so many people out to these events. And then also just the way we run these campaigns, I think really values and centers the work of volunteers and acknowledges that that's actually the most powerful role that we can play on a campaign. And so that to me is a thing that has really shifted over the last year, and I'm very excited to sort of be a part of it.
And it's been interesting, too, to just kind of see Queens really taking center stage in this. First it was the AOC victory and then kicking out Amazon. And now you have, Tiffany Cabán. Do you think there's something about Queens, or do you think it is because it's such a diverse area that hasn't been represented well? Any thoughts about why Queen is just crushing it?
I have no clue. But whatever it is, we need to figure it out so that we can replicate it in the other boroughs soon, because these problems are not exclusive to Queens, of course. I'm just thinking about this insurgency of young people with bold ideas who are coming forward, and I think Caban is with AOC is a part of that insurgency. And I wonder if Caban is the youngest. Is she one of the youngest to ever be district attorney? I mean, I'm curious about that, but we know that, obviously she's young, and she is the youngest person to ever be elected, hopefully, to district attorney. And so this is really just representative of a new generation really taking agency and saying that we have a different vision for what our world could look like.
Yeah, and I think that, the urgency, I do a lot of organizing around climate change, and it's why are all these young people wanting to overthrow the system? Well, it's because we recognize that you're handing us a completely broken system, and we're not going to have, a livable planet, or, how much more could you possibly ask, low-income communities of color to withstand this kind of oppression for so long? And so I think that urgency is exciting, and it really is exciting to see young people in office and not maybe in 20 years I could, do this thing. I worked at a restaurant and I was watching Knocking Down the House, and now every time I fill the ice bucket, I'm thinking of AOC filling the ice bucket, and then a year later, being, the youngest congresswoman ever. It's exciting, and
it's great. It's really exciting. And I think that our in this country, or in society, around the country, you see this message being taken up by artists, right? And so I think it's no coincidence that one of the most watched Netflix specials was really centered around the injustice that happens in the district attorney's office in New York City. And I think that all of these factors are just working together. The one-on-one conversations that organizers are having on the ground, the awakening to, access to, you said, or the power that we actually have as a collective. And I think all these separate factors are working together to create this perfect storm of revolution and change.
Yeah, what do you see kind of coming up next, and how do we keep this power going?
Yeah, I think that I'm a big fan of creating and developing many leaders, and you can't have enough leaders in a movement like this. And these electoral campaigns are just incredible opportunities to develop leadership in everyone. And that's the thing that we just have to keep doing throughout the whole city, throughout the whole country. We just have to keep focusing on what works and learn from what doesn't, and win more of these campaigns and get a lot of very, very important legislation passed and fight a lot of fights. So, yeah.
Is there anything, as far as you're saying, what didn't work? Is there anything on that kind of vein that we've learned from the Caban campaign or recent elections? What could we be doing better?
I definitely have the perspective that we could always be doing everything better. There's always room to do things better, but I also think that we should never let that stop us from forging ahead and continuing to do this work. I think we need a bigger scale of everything. We need more people involved with these projects and all types of campaigns, not just electoral campaigns. And so what we have to do is keep growing the movement, keep pulling people in, continue to be inclusive and welcoming, and not be afraid of the mistakes we're going to make, because we're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I almost had this like question pop in my head. You're saying that. I was like, I wonder like how many candidates at one time, if they all started running, how could DSA support right about now?
That's a very important question. You're not the only one thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that we're going to be thinking about that leading into the Socialist City Council stuff in 2021.
And we will definitely be talking a lot more about that next week with Jabari Brisport. Again, if you want to volunteer, it's bit.ly Caban admin, and you can always find us on Twitter at NYCRPM. You've been listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI, and stay tuned because Jack Devine will be running the news tonight.